Think Forward. Think Research Channel.
Hello, I'm Lee Thornton. Today, a moment with Bob Edwards of XM Radio, late of NPR. Author of a well-received biography of Edward R. Murrow, Bob Edwards is a consummate radio voice. Thanks for being with me.
Great to be here.
Before we talk, this profile from Kim Skeen.
He has been my buddy, my pal, since I was a toddler. I swear, I knew what I was going to do when I was 3 or 4 years old. I wanted to be the voice in the box.
Bob Edwards has been the voice in the box for nearly 4 decades. He's interviewed 20,000 plus newsmakers and celebrities and been on the air through some of the most defining news events of our time.
I was working locally at WTOP, All News Radio in Washington, the night of the Watergate break-in, when it was a local story. And I did the talk-up to NPR's broadcast of Nixon's resignation. And of course, 9/11.
Edwards started his career at a small radio station in his home state of Kentucky. He eventually went on to become the signature voice of National Public Radio for 30 years, first hosting its evening program All Things Considered, and then starting Morning Edition.
I thought I was going to die at NPR. I was just going to do that the rest of my working life or retire from there maybe.
But in 2004, Edwards was replaced as Morning Edition's anchor to make way for a format change at NPR. A few months later, XM Radio wooed him to their subscription radio universe.
Hello and welcome to the Bob Edwards Show.
Edwards hosts a daily program on XM's public radio channel.
I was 57 when I came in here, and to have something invigorating at age 57 is a good thing.
XM reminds him of his early days at NPR.
I got into NPR in its 3rd year, so it was still relatively new. I think they had maybe 1 million listeners. When I left NPR, the program I was doing had 13 million listeners. And overall, public radio had 25 million listeners. And here again, I joined XM in its 3rd year, so it was still new. And it's very exciting to be part of a startup. There aren't a lot of rules, for one thing. You're kind of making it up as you go along.
Edwards doesn't miss the daily news grind and the need, as he says, to get it right live. He pre-tapes his new show, a blend of talk, documentaries, music, and news.
We wanted to feature the voice of a freshman on Capitol Hill during our first year on the air. We're not interested in sound bites. We're interested in conversation, actual conversation, and having the time on the air to explore issues both in depth and a variety of topics with any single guest.
What's our time frame today?
How long are you interesting?
Oh boy, that will vary widely depending on who you ask.
My rule for this program is interesting people. When they stop getting interesting, that's when the interview stops. Some people can give you 5 minutes, and some people, an hour is not enough.
You can still listen to Edwards on traditional public radio airwaves, too. Bob Edwards Weekend, 2 hours of the week's best material, can be heard on public radio stations across the country. His other talents include writing books. His most recent is about broadcast journalism legend Edward R. Murrow. It's dedicated to the memory of Ed Bliss, another broadcasting great who was a teacher, mentor, and friend to Edwards. But while Edwards honors the past, he also respects and counts on the younger generation, his staff, to keep the program on the cutting edge.
I'm learning from my producers who are, half my age and much brighter and just fun to work with. And they turn me on to new ideas, new people, music that I wouldn't discover on my own.
Edwards says XM has enabled him to get out of the studio and travel the country to report on interesting people and places. Kim Skeen reporting for A Moment With.
Okay, we have some pressure to be interesting here. I don't know whether it's on me or you, though, based on
I'll do
that.
my best.
From the beginning, let's begin more or less at the beginning. You knew you wanted to be the voice in the box, and you have a very identifiable, very signature voice. Did you ever train it? Did you ever do anything with it?
No, it's a glandular condition, I guess. I don't know.
It's a gift. It's a gift. I heard a story, I don't know if it's apocryphal, about the late actor Rock Hudson, who had that amazing baritone, you know, and that he had gone out in the woods one day and shouted at the trees until he broke something. That's a heck of a way to renovate your voice, I imagine.
I did, I was conscious of accent. I'm from Kentucky. And in those days, people cared about accents. I don't think they care anymore. But I had other Kentuckians in radio, like Noah Adams at NPR. We had the same experience. We worked on our vowels. Like we would say, ice cream, or that's nice. And we knew you didn't say that on the radio, so we worked at a long I, for example.
So it was more diction things than voice things. Well, it's a marvelous gift. Let's go from Kentucky, Louisville, to Indiana. What happened there?
Well, it's right across the river from Louisville, and that's there was a tiny little radio station there, and that's where I could break in. You know, Louisville was too big time for a beginner. It was one of those little stations.
How old
where
were you?
21.
Oh,
and I'd been
old.
trying for 6 years, I think, of knocking on doors at radio stations. But at a little station, you learn everything because there's no one else to do it. And so I was a DJ, I was doing news, I was fixing the plumbing, I was, everything. Selling radio time or attempting to.
And then time in the Army and doing radio in the Army.
And TV.
And TV.
Right.
And that was in Korea?
Yep.
Korea.
I was the 6 o'clock TV anchorman in Seoul at 23.
I don't have to ask which you liked best. It's obvious which you liked best. Then to Washington.
Right.
And studied with Ed Bliss at American University.
Using the GI Bill for grad school.
I interviewed Professor Bliss shortly before he passed away, and he was very concerned about the state of the news business, and he said they can do better than they do. But can they, Bob? When we think of the technological changes that have enabled the pressures of 24-hour news delivery, even for the broadcast networks, the fragmentation of the audience, the nature of the world, can they do better?
Of course they can, and Ed knew that because Ed wrote for Edward R. Murrow and was the editor of the CBS Evening News with Walter Cronkite in Walter's first 5 years with that broadcast. He worked with giants, and that's what he's talking about. He's talking about judgment. He's talking about what constitutes the news. Those guys didn't do fluff, not in the newscasts. Murrow, of course, did celebrity interviews, but on a different program that was devoted to just that. Now, he's talking about the quality of the newscast, and not, sure, we have all the toys now to do a much better job at journalism, but it's the judgment, the decisions made of what to cover and how to cover it. That's what's lacking, and that's where we're going wrong.
And this is what, and we're not going to talk about NPR right now, we're going to talk about it later, but this is what people apparently believe public radio is doing so much better. And in fact, we have huge TV names who are going to public radio.
Right, and
who knew?
The audience is. You see it in the growth of the audience. As I said back there, 1 million listeners when I began at NPR, 13 million to that program when I left Morning Edition. That's enormous growth, and that's people who are serious about the world and want a good radio journalism. Radio abandoned journalism, commercial radio. When I first broke in, commercial stations had reporters on the street. Now you're lucky to get 30 seconds of headlines and maybe that. And so public radio filled that vacuum. People spinning the dial trying to find some news found public radio, and at the local and national level.
Let's talk about that, the standards that have nothing to do with the gadgetry or the technological changes that have enabled news delivery. Murrow, we wouldn't know who he is, history tells us, except for a man named Raymond Swing, who didn't want the job that Murrow was hired to do, which was called Director of Talks.
Right.
That's always amazed me. Here was this man with no background to do it, who pulled together an extraordinary group of people, learned men, actually, and came up with the standard for the best of what became broadcast news. Could there be a Murrow today?
No. They would get rid of him in a hurry. Murrow believed that what a journalist does is to tackle the most controversial issues. That's what we're about, and we are to hold authority to account. That isn't what goes on in television news, anyway. The appeal is for a mass audience. Murrow didn't care about that. Murrow was very controversial. He didn't believe in balance. I think he was fair, but not balanced. He would never bring on a liar to balance the truth. He would investigate, make his judgment of where the truth was, and deliver that account. Of course, in those days, you did have equal time rule. And for example, when he took on Joseph McCarthy, McCarthy got a half an hour and pretty much hanged himself in that half hour.
Is it your judgment that he was most effective in taking on Murrow? There were others. There was print media was waking up to McCarthy, but Murrow, our history seems to record that he really got in this guy's face.
Yeah, he came late to the game. Many people in print, the Alsop brothers, for example, and others were on McCarthy's case, but he had impact. That program demonstrated the power of television to do news. When people saw it, when people, there was no C-SPAN in those days. People didn't go to congressional hearings. You didn't see what McCarthy was doing at these hearings, the browbeating, the bullying, the suspension of due process. When people saw that, then they understood what this was about. They would say, well, I'm against communism, but I'm also against that. That's not America. That's not who we are. So that was the beginning of the end of McCarthy, that broadcast. Unfortunately, it was also the beginning of the end of Murrow. 2 years later, he lost his sponsor. 2 years after that, he lost his program. Two
Why?
years after that, he was through at CBS by his own choice, but he'd been marginalized so much that he just chose to do something else.
And why do you think that happened?
Because he was taking on the most controversial subjects. William Paley, the chairman of CBS, told him, your programs give me stomach aches. And Murrow told him, well, they go with the job. Well, Paley didn't think they went with the job. Paley was afraid of the FCC, which was much more powerful in those days, afraid of sponsors, not wanting controversy on the air. A lot of what Murrow did upset Southern stations because he tackled civil rights. Brown versus Board of Education, 1954, he thought, well, this is integration. Why isn't it happening? And he did programs to investigate why it wasn't happening. Migrant labor, farmers, he was all over the map with cigarettes. 10 years before the Surgeon General's report, Murrow did 2 programs on the health effects of smoking. And of course, he smoked
puffing all the while.
Both programs, yes, which you did on camera in those days.
We have to assume that McCarthy would have been curtailed at some point, but that it came quicker because of Edward R. Murrow.
Yeah, in 1954, McCarthy began that year with better than 50% in the polls. He was riding high, and this program happened in March. After that, I mean, he ended the year not being able to get 50% of the Senate because he was censured by the Senate. So that program was very effective. And then, of course, he self-immolated taking on the U.S. Army in his hearings, and that was his real undoing.
You had another book, Fridays with Red. Always, it's kind of interesting that Tuesdays with Maury, Fridays with
Came
Red.
years after
I know,
Fridays with
many
Red.
years. Your book was early 90s, 1992, was it?
Yep.
And that was about Red Barber after he passed away. Part of your own legend were the Barber years, conversations between you and Red Barber. Tell me about that.
When we started Morning Edition, we had sports segments within the program, and we had no tradition of covering sports. So we filled that time with commentators. Frank DeFord, for example, who's still doing that job for Morning Edition. And we asked Red Barber to do it, and it was Red's idea that it be live, be a conversation with the host, and that was the brilliance of it, rather than sitting down and reading a script, that it was a live conversation. Every Friday for 4 minutes, no one moved, unless they were in their car, but they paid strict attention for 4 minutes. It was the most popular thing on NPR. And I think it was the music in his voice, and the guy he's just a born communicator. Someone can reach out and grab you by the lapels and compel you to listen to him. But he was, fabulous. I learned so much about broadcasting from him. How to engage an audience, and he was just wonderful. So when he passed, people were so torn up. I still have them, 2 or 3 boxes of cards and letters and people in grief. And I thought, well, they should have this little Valentine. I'll write a little book about those 12 years, and then flesh out the rest of his career and life that people didn't know about, maybe, and people will have this memento, and so I was kind of happy with the way it turned out.
Any more books in the works?
I don't know if I have time. I mean, now I'm doing this program that there are no reporters to introduce. They're my interviews.
Yeah, you're
I'm
it.
cramming all the time for these interviews.
Since you're there, let's talk about XM. It is giving you a new lease on creative life, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. It's very exciting. It's 170 channels, and trying to find my little niche in that cornucopia of radio. And it's been very exciting because they've left me free to do whatever I want with the program.
Which is what?
What do I want to do with the program?
Yes.
Have conversation, mainly. Sit down and talk to people, to thinkers, to people with ideas, and relaxed and in-depth, and to do other things, too, follow other kinds of formats.
Are you doing documentaries?
Yeah. Did one on, I did 2 hours on immigration before anyone else was doing immigration. As the bill came up for the Senate. Went out to the desert with the Border Patrol and with the Samaritans, who are this group who leave water. They have water stations in the desert for people trying to cross, and hundreds die each year in the desert. So we're able to do that. Did an hour on mountaintop removal coal mining, which I think few people know about, but we are blowing up the Appalachian Mountains, the oldest mountains in North America, to get the coal out of there, because more than 50% of energy in America is generated by coal. But we are destroying these beautiful, oldest forests in America, and throwing all the trees and the rock and the topsoil down into the mountain streams below. So we are losing streams, thousands of miles of streams. It's appalling. So had to do that. And a lot of it's happening in my native Kentucky, so it's very upsetting.
You don't have the audience at XM, at least not yet, that you had at NPR. Has that been a psychological adjustment for you, or are you, as I think it was the late great Arthur Godfrey once said, still talking to one person?
Radio carries that illusion, and I've been at it for 38, 39 years now, and I still think that person on the radio is talking to me. It's just something about the medium of radio does that. You don't have that illusion in television. that that person is talking only to me. And I love that about radio. But no, my job is to just do the very best program I can, and the audience will come. I'm totally confident that they will.
If you
That's
build
what
it.
happened at NPR.
Right.
So,
Somebody counted, we heard on the package, 20,000 interviews.
oh, it's really more than
More
that.
than that
yeah.
now. Are there any that stand out? Was there a person that you could point to as the best, or was it Red?
Red was always the best at the time I was doing Red, yes. No, more recently at XM, I think I did my favorite interview with a Jesuit priest in East Los Angeles named Gregory Boyle. And he works with young Latino gang members to get them out of gangs and keep them out of gangs. And he's doing magnificent work. He finds them jobs. He has doctors volunteering to remove their tattoos, which is gang insignia and marks them for life, and assassination by rival gangs. If he can't find employers to hire these kids, he starts his own businesses. He's got about 5 businesses going. And he's just, we have so many religious hypocrites. And here's a guy who's apparently read the book and following those teachings and saving not souls, but lives. And I love the man, and he tells a good radio story too. So maybe that has something to do with it. He's a very effective communicator.
Who was the worst?
Oh, the worst.
There must have been many, but
Yes, a rock
stands
and
out?
roller, a singer-songwriter named Jonathan Richman, who just has a problem with media. He must have been burned really badly. And I thought it might be me, but the same thing happened to Noah Adams, who interviewed him, Noah at NPR. He just has some kind of chip on his shoulder. I would ask him, well, what about this lyric? Why did you choose it? What kind of question is that? What do you want to know that for? And I used, I think, every usable minute of that interview, but he was hostile throughout. He walked out on Noah Adams.
and every moment of your patience, no doubt. Noah Adams, NPR. You were there at the creation, were you?
No, got there in
Near
the
the
third
creation.
year. Yeah.
Third year. So ironic. Let's talk about those long years at NPR. And that last day, or how you found out that you'd no longer be at NPR. What was that like? What happened?
They decided to take me off of Morning Edition, where I had been for 24 and a half years. And then job offers started coming in. I went out on a book tour for the Murrow book.
No, Bob, you can't get away with that. They decided to take you off. We know job offers came.
Yeah.
But what was said? What did they say? What did you say?
They said that as of April 30th, 2004, I would no longer be doing Morning Edition.
Just like that? In an email? Was it an instant
they
message?
called
Or
me
somebody
into
came to your door?
Into an office. That I was to be senior correspondent
Yes.
with undefined duties.
And what did you say?
Well, what did I say? Do you want me to say the actual words? I disputed their judgment. How's that?
You questioned.
I did. Yes, I did.
Such as, are you out of your mind?
Yeah. And I got this FedEx letter within a few days from the CEO of XM, Hugh Pinero, and it said, maybe NPR doesn't want to hear you every day, but I do.
That must have been really a good feeling.
Case closed.
So correspondent was out the window. What was the audience reaction? Because my own reaction was, I got to tell you, some kind of deep grief. What did the audience say about it?
50,000 emails to NPR.
50,000.
In protest. There was an online petition, 25,000 people signed that. I had some friends, and that was very gratifying, and I needed that at the time.
I'm sure. Do you listen to the show?
Every morning.
How can you do that?
It's the best news program there is.
I worked for NPR for 2 years. It was one of the best jobs I ever had, and I've had many. When I left Weekend, All Things Considered, I couldn't listen because I wasn't on it anymore. Isn't that silly?
Well, it is because there's no other quality news on the radio. I mean, I still believe in public radio and raise money for public radio and will help any public radio station anytime. Now I'm back on public radio with Bob Edwards Weekend. So I'm still part of the family.
Yes, another irony
Yeah.
to the story. And I'm sure the listeners have received that well.
I hope so. I hope so. It's doing pretty well. We're adding more stations all the time.
You have a raft of awards, a raft of recognition. We saw some of that in the piece. What has meant most to you in terms of the recognition you've received?
Personal comments. I like to go out to NPR stations because I meet listeners there. The only bad thing about XM is it has no stations, no posts out in the country to go meet listeners. But the personal comments of people and how much it means to them and the email I get has been very gratifying. People go on at some length about what the program means to them, and that's nice to get.
So that's reward.
Oh, absolutely.
You said in the piece that you thought you'd die at NPR, meaning that you would be there till the last day of your career. Do you think you'll die at XM? I mean, in that way, not in the other way.
I'm there as long as they'll have me.
Yeah.
It's great fun. I mean, when I got there, it was 2.5 million subscribers. Now it's 8, and that's 2 years. So that's some growth there. That's growing faster than the NPR audience grew. So I'm very happy about that, and it looks very promising for the future.
If you had, this is one of those, if you were a tree, what kind of a tree would you be? But if you had anything about your career to do over, what would it be?
Oh, I'd probably make the same mistakes all over again. No, it's been good. I don't know that I would do anything different. I feel very lucky. I feel that, my goal was to follow Murrow and Cronkite to the Tiffany network, at CBS, because back in the day, that was something.
Yeah.
Well, CBS isn't what it was.
No, it isn't.
And I landed at NPR, and NPR became, in my mind, the Tiffany. So I was very lucky about that, and I think I got into XM at the right moment too. And to get this program, this opportunity at this age, to be treated like a grown-up and told, use your judgment, do a good program. And to have the backing that we have and to have the staff that I have. Oh my, it's just,
Amazing.
I can't wait to get to work in the morning.
We should mention before we go that you are in the Broadcasting Hall of Fame already.
The Radio Hall of Fame.
Radio Hall of Fame. 10 seconds on what you want Bob Edwards' legend to be.
Oh.
He was a man who...
This man who did his best.
Sure did. Thank you. This Moment with Bob Edwards. We'll see you again. I'm Lee Thornton.